Let's see what happens on day 145 of a screenwriter's journey. Looks like, so here's the deal. I'm on page 27 of the screenplay. If it's going to be 110-ish pages, I should be right into the break into 2. And here we are having Lexi and Holly yapping in the car on the drive up or over or wherever it is. It's just too much talking, too much dialogue. I wish I could flip up and see how many pages this scene has been. It's probably hasn't been too long, but the point is, gosh, I need less bleeping dialogue and more bleeping action and story. That's my thought right now. It's really hard for me, I don't know about you, to reveal character in action. Obviously, if someone is punching someone or getting in a fight or something, but just the act of doing something without describing their emotions like you would in a book. And using all the adjectives that they tell you not to use in screenplays. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. I know visually, can you see she turned angrily or she turned sadly, she turned... Those things the actress in this case is going to get across. Do you have to write that in the script for the person to understand that? Should it be obvious by the situation, the particular line that she's just delivered or just heard? I guess that I don't smother my script in adjectives, but I don't really see the need to completely strip them out, although that's what I read and that's what I hear. And so that's kind of what I try to do, but I don't exactly know why that is. I should pose that question on the Screenwriters or whatever the name of that Facebook page is and elsewhere. I don't know if it's considered a crutch maybe, or the fact that, you know, they say she quickly ran across the room. You could just say she sped across the room. I guess that's probably more it. And again, when you get to producing a film, it doesn't matter what you wrote. Obviously, if you walked or ran, but if you ran, if you raced across the room, sped across the room, hurried across the room, there's a million ways to write that. And for the most part, that's not going to matter once you get on set. As I have said in my experience, other than the dialogue and the blocking of the scene, I don't know that I ever had to give an actor or actress direction like, no, don't hurry across the room, run across the room, or, do something angrily. Again, if it's not inherent by what's in the script, then is adding an adjective going to suddenly make it that way? And I guess it could be sort of considered a cheat or a shortcut, or the lazy person's way of writing it instead of putting it into the dialogue or somehow into an expression. But then again, you come to expressions, and how much do you describe of a character's face? He looks surprised. His eyes widen in surprise. He looks bewildered. She looks curious. They exchange glances. She shoots him a glance. There's a million different ways to write that, and I have a feeling that I write maybe too much. I have a lot of looks and glances and glimpses and that sort of thing. And it does seem important because, the eyes are the doorway to the soul, right? We can all agree on that. So 9 times out of 10, what you see in a character's eyes, it's just amazing how expressive, obviously the whole face, but the eyes are what really does it. So again, how much of that do you have to write, or should you write into your script so that people will get it? Or again, will they get it just because of the story, the scene, the back and forth dialogue, the situation, etc.? I don't know. It's an age-old question, at least in my mind, in my scripts. So if you just look at what I write here, Holly gives it a long moment's thought. That's kind of a direction, that it's not just a quick bit of dialogue. Lexi laughs, puts out her hand. There's the obvious action. Holly eyes it warily. Warily. Would you really have to put warily? I don't know. Feigns hesitation. In other words, we know she's going to shake it. Jake studies the SUV up ahead versus looks or keeps it in his sights or something. His eyes find Abby's in the rearview mirrors. Jake catches Luke's eye in the rearview mirror. Abby and Luke regard one another. Luke shakes his head. So some of that, I mean, you shaking your head is a nonverbal dialogue, obviously, regarding each other. What do they do when they see each other? What's the look in their eyes? If you explained all that like you typically do in a novel, you're going to have a super long script that isn't going to reflect a page per minute, which is the industry standard. So I don't know. I mean, when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, if you're writing a purely spec script, you have no particular person you're going to send it to. You don't have an actor in mind, a director in mind, and you're just writing it to be read by some reader, maybe in a competition or something, as opposed to a studio reader. It's crazy how I don't think you would do this writing a spec, so to speak, novel. But when writing a screenplay, you can, and probably should to some degree, tailor it to your audience. If you know that you're just starting out, or you've written, 10 scripts, which to me is the same as just starting out, and you don't really know who's going to read this script other than you get it peer reviewed or whatever, or are you going to send it to get coverage? Are you going to try to get an agent? Are you going to try to send it to a small production company? Do you know some investor who has got $500,000 laying around? What is that person going to be most interested in? What is going to intrigue him or her the most? And how can you get that across in your script? Do you want it to be bloody and violent? Do you need it to have a bunch of sex, drugs, rock and roll? Can you write the same story 3 or 4 or 5 different ways, not necessarily changing anything that happens, but just the way it's written to make the person turn the page? Because at the end of the day, like writing a novel, when it's interesting, that's another topic, but this reader, whoever this hypothetical person reading is, you have to make it so that that person will turn the page, because literally if they don't, unless it's the end, then you don't want them to turn the page. But then it's curtains for your story. What I was thinking of in terms of turning the page, what's interesting when you think about it, and I've thought about it before, I guess, but it's just returning to mind. When you read a book, let's say you're a real old-fashioned reader and you still like to read books, not online, which is my preferred way. You're sitting in your favorite chair, whatever, you're turning the page. You actively have to turn the page. Your eyes have to go down the page, then you've got to turn the page. When you're watching a movie, all you need to do, aside from eating popcorn and drinking your pop or soda, is watch and pay attention and listen. You don't have to turn the page. You can't stop the movie from unfolding. When you're reading a book, I remember when I read The Shining, which, man, that was a scary book, and Jurassic Park to some extent. But I think The Shining, I would get to the end of a chapter and I literally couldn't go on. I had to put it down for a day or two or whatever, because it was so creepy, especially when it got to the twins and the blood and the red rum and all that stuff. I was just shaking in my proverbial boots. And so think of the difference. In a movie, you could get up and walk out if it A, sucks, or B, is too scary. You could close your eyes. You could plug your ears. But you don't actively have to turn that page to see what happens next. All you have to do is sit there. What's my point? Good question. I'm not entirely sure. But there is a difference. Oh, no, I've gone back to the beginning of the script. Oh, my gosh. I literally wasn't watching myself. I was just staring off into space while I was delivering that monologue. That brilliant monologue, I might add. Wow, I've literally totally gone back to the beginning, and I don't know why. I guess I really need to go back and see what I did here. I'm breaking a rule, but I feel like I have to. Stand by. Okay, so I broke my own rule about stopping and going back, but I had to because I was on that long rant. And then I realized by watching back, the reason I went back to the beginning is, and I kind of foreshadowed this previously, I realized that the whole thing about Holly being presented as Lexi's aunt, I don't really need it, which is a huge, it's not a huge deal, but it's a huge shift after 144 days of thinking I did. I literally asked my wife, would a 6-year-old be swayed by hearing that someone's her aunt? And she said, are you kidding me? No, they wouldn't. This little kid probably wouldn't even know what an aunt is. And so that sort of lifted a huge burden off me because I was trying to make all this stuff work. And is it believable, realistic that she would really think it was her aunt? And if not her aunt, why didn't she take her in? And there was just all these questions. So I think now that I've determined that, I am going through here and making some little changes, which as usual may look little at the time, but they may end up with some wholesale changes. And so that is a kind of a big deal. So I'm glad I stopped and looked at that. All right, so now I'm figuring out, not for the first time, what is the relationship between Holly and the girl who will be named Lexi. Oh my gosh, it's just, again, it's weird that I'm commenting on this 6 weeks after the fact when I know what else I've written. And so now, interrupting myself, I see what I'm writing, and this idea that Holly does want to kind of be there for her to some extent, establish maybe not a relationship, but maybe be a constant in her life. And that really is important for Lexi's character and for Holly's once the main story unfolds. And that's something I really need to keep in mind. And you need to keep in mind when you are writing. If you explore something, don't just leave it as a loose end. That's extremely dissatisfying, whether it's an actual story element or if it's some character trait or something. And I'm not saying that I've done that, but this is just a reminder that I really need to do that. Or a stuffed animal. Please correct that mistake. It's funny how sometimes your eye doesn't see it because your brain says, yes, stuffed animal. All right. So now the other thing, I don't know if I'm going to change it this draft, so maybe I shouldn't say it. But speaking of Holly's relationship, which really doesn't change other than she was not presented by Rachel as Lexi's aunt. But there's another thing that I'm thinking, which is a much smaller thing, and that is Holly giving Lexi the name of Lexi and her changing her name, basically. Okay, there's nothing that brings from best in a broken promise. That's all right. I mean, that's better than the line I had. I don't know if it's a keeper yet. Maybe it's not a keeper. And that's even worse. I think I went backwards there. Once a month, that'll be just... Oh, look at that. 4th time's a charm. Did I get rid of it? What did I do? Gosh, it's so funny. I mentioned that before about changing dialogue and how it just comes to you that, that line back on page 5, I need to fix that. Oh, here we go. The girl. I'm checking to see, and I think I'm changing her name to Lexi. So there I have, in a flash, removed all occurrences of the girl and right from the beginning named her Lexi. And I think the reason I did this, that thing about, your name's Lexi, no, it's not. Well, it is now. It was a really powerful line. I had no problem with it, but it just seemed, in this rewritten version, at least, it just seemed kind of forced. And there's nothing worse than forced dialogue that you hang on to because that cliche about you have to kill your babies and all that kind of stuff. So I'm also struggling, as you can see, with Paul's first line because it sets up so much. In the previous version, when he said, "Are you ready for this?" meaning, are you ready for everything that's going to come up? Because that's basically, you're talking to the audience and you're saying, "Are you ready for this?" Which I could actually go back and use if I had to. But for now, I've changed the relationship and I've changed it so Lexi does not change her name. Because when you think about it, even though when you go into witness protection, you get your name changed, since she's not in it, and since, does her father even know her? How many Lexis or Alexas or whatever her real name is, how many of those are there in the world? She's probably not going to keep whatever last name she had. So the danger of her father or grandfather or someone bad finding her based on her name is pretty slim. So it's just one less thing to kind of unnecessary complication or a sort of a plot device. And now we've got McNeil in the van, not entirely sure that A, I need this scene, or B, I may need it, but maybe this doesn't need to be the scene. Maybe instead of bulking up McNeil, who's going to disappear and literally never be in the script again, because again, this is 12 years ago. So maybe have this conversation with Paul, who is going to be more or less a continuing character. So that's another thing, that it's tempting sometimes just to throw characters in because you want a bigger cast. You need someone to be a sounding board for the main character or whoever. And then you realize, oh, I literally put them in there just to provide, to be a sounding board, and they're not going to appear again. So something to watch out for. Day 145 in the books, a couple big changes, and one, not really a rant, but a long expose editorial on the stuff I talked about. So 145 in the books, and more to come, obviously. Thanks. Bye.